This is Atari Days podcast.
We had an Atari in Trump's Castle in New Jersey for a while, and we had an Atari in Museum of History in Chicago. They were using it with their ticket kiosks.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Dale Lemke is founder of Compu-Cable Systems, a company that created the SpectraView and SpectraView 2 graphic generator cartridge, information display systems for use by television stations and cable companies, which ran on Atari 8-bit computers. The company is still in business today. It is called Display Systems International and specializes in character generators and television program listings. This interview took place on October 18, 2016.
Well, I'm originally from North Dakota, and grew up on a farm there and went to school at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. When I ended up getting married to a Canadian gal and moved to Canada for a couple of years and then moved back down to the United States in 1980, 81, and 82, and opened up Computerland stores with my brother Kevin Lemke in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and Fargo, North Dakota. And he ultimately went on to open stores in Bismarck and Minot. And it was during that time period in the 81, 82 time period with our stores in Grand Forks and Fargo that I had the idea for my company that I now have. And what happened is we had someone come into the store from Hibbing, Minnesota, if you know where that is, from the cable TV company there. And they asked us, well, couldn't you use some of these new microcomputers, the Apple II, the Radio Shack TRS-80, the Atari, the Texas Instruments, all these new microcomputers were just out on the market. And they said, couldn't you use these microcomputers to develop a channel for cable TV, a channel such that it would display weather, news, local events. Back then they called it a character generator. Mm-hmm. So basically text, maybe some rudimentary graphics, and it would just sit there and cycle through on a certain channel, maybe channel 22, 26, whatever it happens to be, to display that local type of information. And they were currently paying, $10,000 to $30,000, $40,000 for a dedicated unit that would let them type in some color and some graphics and some text and create a channel like that. So while I was with Computerland with my brother, we hired a gentleman who had self-taught himself on the Apple II, and he developed some software for us, and we turned the Apple II into a information display system, character generator, whatever you would want to call it. And we sold 3 of them to the cable TV systems in and around Hibbing, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. But it always kind of tweaked my memory or my thoughts that the Apple II back then with 2 floppy drives was $5,000, and the Atari was much cheaper and it had much better graphics, mm-hmm. and it had very clean video out, which would work great for cable TV companies. So in 1982, when I sold my share in the Computerland store in Fargo and moved back to Canada, I took along an Atari computer and I self-taught myself assembly language, and I thought, I'm going to develop the same type of thing but on an Atari for the cable TV market and start my own company. And so after about a year of working on the Atari and developing it, that's what I did. I started my own company. I raised some money. I wrote a business plan. I developed a prototype that did some rudimentary stuff so I could show it could be done, and started my own company in 1983.
Nice. So was the SpectraVideo 1 your first product under that company?
Yes, it was the SpectraView, we called it. Was rather interesting. And if I go too far in one direction, or whatever, you let me know if you think I'm doing too much detail or whatever. But once we got the company started, then I hired a programmer and we started doing flow charting and design and development work, and of course the Atari 800 XL was our computer, and we developed software in assembly language. So we wrote everything in assembly language, and we had to do everything ourselves. we ended up, and of course everything was on floppy drive back then. I don't remember what it was, 80, 90K per floppy.
Yeah.
Our source code eventually ended up to be about 20K of compiled assembly language source code. It was on 12 separate floppy disks. I don't remember how many. We probably had a couple hundred subroutines and modules and things like that, maybe even more, 300-400. The stack of paper, a printout, was about, I remember if it was about 4 or 5 inches of printout of subroutines and code. And we ended up having a problem because our idea was to stick this program into a cartridge, and so that you could just pop the cartridge into the top of the Atari, and it would turn it into an information display system, and you'd type in your messages, and it would display them for you. Well, as probably some of you or many of you know, the Atari cartridge is an 8K space, and we had 20K of code. So now what the heck were we going to do? So it turns out I found a developer of a game cartridge, and I don't know what games they were using it for, but they had a cartridge which had bank selecting on it. So 4K of that 8K was always resident, and then 4K could be swapped in and out with 3 different sections. So you could actually stick 16K of code onto this cartridge, which was great, but it didn't eliminate our problem because we still had about another 4K of code to go somewhere. So what were we going to do? So I poked around, and I'm not an electrical engineer by any means, but I poked around a little bit, and I thought, well, wait, we're not using the basic chip. And the basic chip in the Atari 800XL took up 8K. So I thought, well, what if we take the basic chip out and we put our own chip in? So I took an 800XL apart, and I desoldered very carefully the basic chip out of the computer, and put a socket and soldered a socket back in. And after a few attempts and almost screwing it up, I got it in there, and then and we burned our software onto EEPROMs and put the EEPROM in and did some tests, and lo and behold, we were able to access that memory. And so now we had our other 8K. So we ended up having 4K of resident on the cartridge and 8K of resident on the computer where the basic chip used to reside, and then 12K of 3 banks of 4K selectable that could be swapped in and out at any time. So we ended up, getting it to work. Of course, we had to deliver our product with the computer because we had to modify it, and they couldn't buy their own computers. So the SpectraView one was born, and that's what we sold to cable TV companies and other private cable TV companies all across the nation.
Wow, I've never heard of anyone hacking an Atari in that way.
Yeah, it was interesting. We eventually, after desoldering, I don't know how many, dozens of basic chips, I thought there's got to be a better way because, well, actually, I think the first few came with a socket on it, but eventually Atari stopped using sockets, and we had to do the soldering and desoldering and everything.
Right. So before we move on to the next product, I would like to know how many of those you sold. What do they cost? What do you remember about that?
Sure. We sold the SpectraView 1, which is, again, a dedicated, modified Atari 800XL with the cartridge, manual, and everything, not including a disk drive, just the computer and everything, I think for about $2,500 US. And we ended up selling... Well, later on, we came out with a SpectraView. We called it the SpectraView 2, which was a cartridge-only, less features and less options. Didn't do as much as the SpectraView 1 did, but it was a cartridge-only. So if people wanted to, they could go buy their own Atari computer. And of course, back then, later on, after the 800XL, all the other versions of the computer were coming out, including up to the 1200XL, and that cartridge would work on any of them. So they could buy their own Atari computer, stick that in there, and it would turn it into an information display system for cable TV. So, we sold, of the SpectraView 1s and 2s, I figured somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 while we were selling the product.
Wow. And I understand the SpectraView 2 cartridge only was like $2,000?
The cartridge, the SpectraView 2 cartridge only, I think we sold it for about, if I remember correctly, less than $1,000. I think it was about $800 or $900.
Okay.
But keep in mind, these cable TV companies, that was fantastic to them because they were paying $10, $15, $20, $30,000 for systems that were built specifically for that, and was very expensive and had limited capabilities. So
Sure.
we had better graphics, we had video out, and you could throw on a floppy disk drive and save it. So if the power went out, it would come back, it would be all fine, it would reload itself. So they were ecstatic.
Wow. So how'd you get the word out about this thing? Was it like in trade publications?
Yeah. So what we did is our market was not, was not for the microcomputer market. It was the cable TV market.
Right.
So the first thing we did was after we had the product almost developed, we attended the National Cable Television Association trade show in Las Vegas in 1984, and big trade show, huge trade show. There were probably 40 or 50,000 delegates. And we had a small 10 by 10 booth, and we just sat there and handed out and got literature printed up, had a little backdrop done up and a demo, and we sat there and talked to people and showed them what we had and word of mouth, and we didn't sell anything at the show, and I think the show was in the summer sometime, let's say June, July. And I remember a couple months later, probably in August, September, we got a phone call from where was that now? Somewhere in it was Ohio. I'll probably remember it eventually here, but somewhere in Ohio, and that guy said, he called us up and says, I saw this SpectraView 1 system you had at the NCTA show in Las Vegas. Says, we're going to take 2 of those. and I said, okay, and I took all his information down and hung up. And then I told my guys, oh crap, now what are we going to do? We got an order for 2 of these, and we're not done yet. So we had to scramble, and within about a month we finished it, tested it, and started shipping. And it was. I'm not going to say we never looked back because we had our ups and downs for sure, but it certainly started the ball rolling, and we started selling, like I say, product, and I think we sold the Atari SpectraView 1 and 2 for probably about 7 or 8 years, and sold about, like I say, about 3,000 or 4,000 of them. So
wow. So you mentioned ups and downs. Tell me about some of the challenges. Tell me about some of the good stuff those early days.
Well, because we were dealing with a lot of cable companies, they wanted local weather. So how are we going to do local weather? What are we going to do? Well, back then there was a company called Heathkit. I don't know if you ever remembered or heard of it.
Yeah.
And they made a weather station, and it would collect rain and humidity and temperature and do all kinds of stuff. And, of course, Heathkit was a kit. You had to put it together. So we ordered one of these things, and it had a parallel port on it. So I thought, okay, well, we might be able to do something with this. So, and again, keep in mind, I do not have a degree in electrical engineering or anything. I'm just a computer science major, math minor. I want to try and make things work kind of guy. So we bought this Heathkit and brought it in. It had a parallel port, so it's got 16 lines coming out. And I thought, doggone it, parallel, these lines are just either high or low. They're on or off. So take a look at the joystick ports. When you push to the left, right, up, or down, and push the button, it's either on or off. All these lines are on or off. Well, a joystick port has 5 lines on one and 5 lines on the other. So we got 10 lines coming in. What can we do? So I had somebody develop me a little PC board that would allow 8 lines of those 16 lines to come in. And then flip to the other 8 lines and back and forth, flip back and forth. And then it used one of the buttons off the joystick port, the shooting buttons, as to indicate whether it was the high bits or low bits. And so I developed some software then on the interrupt of the Atari so we could read these lines. And I figured we're reading these lines about 10,000 times a second as the other software is still continuing because we're using the interrupting capability of the Atari.
Right.
And I had to develop some software to make sure that, because these lines change and they flux as they go high, low, high, low, high, low, high, and then they stay high, and then they'll go high, low, high, low, high, low, and then they'll stay low. So you had to not just take an instant reading, but you had to kind of read it a few times, make sure that it had stabilized, and then trust that reading. And sure enough, lo and behold, it worked. We had weather through the joystick ports of the Atari, and now we could read temperature, pressure, wind speed, wind direction, and rainfall. And so if they wanted weather, they'd order one of these Heath kits and use those, and we'd sell them the little interface, and they'd plug it into the joystick ports, and away they'd go.
Wow. So this was like super local weather because it's literally the weather on top of the cable building.
Exactly,
I love
yeah.
that.
So if the cable building's in town, you're getting in-town weather, and generally your cable, what they call it, the head end, the cable TV head end was not in town. It was usually, 5 miles out of town or whatever, so you were getting the actual weather from out of town. So
that's
kind of funny.
Huh.
Yeah.
Did people request other interfaces or other weird things that you either added or didn't?
Well, one of the other things we added was Atari had a graphics pad, and you could draw little pictures. It wasn't real fantastic, but it was good. And it was a cartridge, and it saved the pictures onto the floppy disk drive. So I thought, well, we would like to do graphics as well. And then you could stick these graphics in what we called a little schedule. So you could schedule your page 1, 2, 3, and then picture 1, and then page 4, 5, picture 6, 7, and so on down. And you'd say how many seconds to display and that type of thing, and it would do all that. But a problem with the graphics pad was there was no way to type text on your pictures. It was just, drawing tools. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to draw your text on there. I thought that was pretty archaic. So I took the Atari graphics pad cartridge and dumped the EEPROMs off of it and found there was probably about 2 or 3K of blank space in there. So I thought, heck, this is pretty easy. What I'll do is I'll write some code because we had code already that let you type in text on your screen to create your pages of textual information. I'll use that similar code and write some ways to break into it when you're running your graphics pad program. And that way then you could draw your picture, and then you could hit the escape key. It would give you a cursor with a glowing cursor that you could move around with the arrow keys, and you could type in text, and you could go back and change it or do whatever you wanted to it, and then eventually save it as a picture onto the floppy disk drive. And so I burned new EEPROMs for the graphics pad cartridge, mm-hmm. and then that way, then if you had one of my special graphics pads that you bought from us, and you hit the escape key, now you could type text. You could draw a graphics picture, and then you could add some text, like for sale or call this phone number or things like that, and it looked much better. You could select the color and all that too. So that was kind of interesting. We sold a lot of graphics pads and of course floppy disk drives because of that too, because they had to save that on the floppy disk drive as well. So.
Wow. So you were reverse engineering other people's assembly language programs, and yikes.
Yep. Yeah. I got to the point where, I could tell people, just show me the assembly language dump, and I'll start to tell you what it's doing, because I could look at it and see, okay, well, this is incrementing the accumulator, and this is shifting it over, and this is doing that, and this is... So it almost got to the point where I think I could almost see, the different types of commands that were happening and what it might be trying to do. So
sure.
Now, I was going to mention one of the other challenges we had was, I got tired of desoldering and putting a socket in over the basic chip on the Atari. And also, when we did this modification for the graphics pad cartridge, of course, then again, you had to take their chips out, and if they weren't socketed, you had to desolder them and put them in. And that was a real pain in the butt. It takes a lot of time to do that. So I thought, well, there's got to be a better way. And again, not having an electrical engineering background, most of the chips of the EEPROM would line up with the chips that were in there already, and from what I could tell from manufacturer, how they worked. So what I ended up doing is you take your EEPROM. Well, first of all, you take the chip, the basic chip, let's say, and you put a little dot of solder on each one of the little legs coming down. Then you could push the EEPROM over the top of that, and when you heated up that solder, it would just suck right in on top of it. So now you had that EEPROM piggybacked on top of the basic chip. But you had to somehow disable that basic chip and make sure the EEPROM was worked. So I found out through some trial and error and some reading and if I cut the power on the basic chip and put the power from the board up to my EEPROM, bypassing the basic chip, and there were two other little wires I had to cut and solder, and I don't remember what they were. One was ground, I think, and one was something else. But if you did those three modifications, now you could just piggyback right on top of the basic chip, and you didn't have to desolder it, and it would disable the basic chip and enable the EEPROM, and it would work.
Wow.
So it saved a bunch of time, not having to desolder and put sockets in or do whatever you wanted to. Now we use that same technique on the graphics pad cartridge, because those were, again, EEPROMs in there too. And if we put our chips just piggybacked on top of that, disabled theirs, enabled ours, it will work just fine. So yeah, it was, again, more challenges, but it worked out really good.
Amazing. I've done a lot of these interviews, and a lot of times people don't remember technical details anymore. I get the answer, it was 30 years ago, I don't know, I did something in BASIC, and wow, you've got a great memory for this stuff.
Well, it was exciting times, challenging times. And of course, when you start your own company, you're everything, right? You're the president, you're the bookkeeper, you're the chief engineer, you're the programmer, you're the janitor, you're everything. And even though you might have one or two employees, you still got to do it all. And took pride in what we did. I guess I think we had a really great product. For years after we sold these things, eventually we went in from Atari. We went to Commodore and did the same thing on a Commodore Amiga, because it was very video-orientated, and eventually into Windows. And, we sold the Atari probably between 1984 and I'd say 1989, 90, somewhere in there. And I'll bet in the late 90s, we had someone call us yet, and they still had one of our Ataris, and it still had the floppy disk drive. And, these are the old 5 1/4-inch black floppy disks that, were actually floppy. And he said the floppy disk wasn't working anymore, and he sent it into us, and we pulled the floppy drive out of the floppy disk out of the floppy drive, and literally there was the magnetic material off the floppy was worn off. It had gone around so many times. So there was no magnetic material to record anymore. And all he really needed to do was put a new floppy drive in, and it would have worked. So.
Wow. And your company's still in business today, doing more or less the same thing?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, we're doing we still sell a product, and we eventually developed the product into Windows. So now an IBM PC, an old under Windows, running our software, which runs essentially the same type of function. Lets you, and I call it PowerPoint on steroids. So it lets you create content with graphics and text, and change the window, the screen into different zones, so you can have advertising in one area and a logo in another area, and weather in another area, and a crawl across the bottom. But it still does the same function. It's for anyone who wants to do information to their clients. So, a lot of the cable companies still use it used to use it for real estate channels, for advertising channels, for news channels. We've sold a lot of units now to private cable, which would be like universities, hotels, gated communities, and they use it for their student information and their hotel information and whatever it happens to be, however they want to try and get information out to their clientele. But about 15 years ago, we had kind of spiked. We sold this product and some Ataris and IBMs and Amigas to all over the world. We've sold to the U.S. Army in South Korea. We've sold product to. We had an Atari in Trump's Castle in New Jersey for a while, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. We had an Atari in the Museum of History in Chicago. They were using it with their ticket kiosks to do ticket information when you first came in the door at the museum. So we sold these things all over the place, but mainly it's been cable TV and hotels and universities and that type of thing. But about 15 years ago, we saw that business kind of peak. It hit a high, and then we saw it starting to come down again. So, okay, what are we going to do here? We need to, I'd like to continue the business. So about 15 years ago, we got into TV listings. So, and we don't do the TV listings now. Well, we do some of it, but very little of it. The main TV listings we do right now is the scrolling TV listings that is dedicated to scrolling. It's non-interactive. It's probably in a hotel that you go into a hotel and you check in and you turn to channel 27 or 11.2, and you see this list of what the channels is on in the next 3 hours of what's on, and you can't change it. It just scrolls by.
Like a preview channel sort of thing.
Yeah, kind of like a preview channel, and that's what we do, mainly what we do now. Of course, we still do that. You can use half a channel of TV listings, and you use half a channel of content if you want advertising, information, whatever it happens to be. But that's mainly we do TV listings now, and we're the third largest provider of that type of TV listings channel in North America right now.
Wow.
So yeah, it's come a long way since the little Atari, which was a great little product and everything. But and we're not by any means a big company. We're about 12 people, but we've had a great time. Cable TV industry has been a great industry to be in, and we're still doing well, which after almost 34 years, it's kind of boggles my mind. So.
What haven't I asked you about the Atari Days that I should have? Is there a story or something that we need to touch on?
Of course, once before we did the Amiga, we tried to use the next Atari.
The STs?
I'm trying to remember it. Sorry?
The Atari STs?
The ST.
Yeah.
Yes, the Atari ST, that's what it was. We tried to develop our product onto the Atari ST, and we didn't have very much success. It was very difficult and a much different experience than using the Atari 800 and 800 XL series. That information was so readily available, and it was just, I don't know, that the old Atari product was such a solid product. It just ran and ran and ran. It was so good, and the ST we just didn't get anywhere. And then before we did the Commodore Amiga, we tried to develop our product on a Japanese computer. There was a Japanese series of computers called the MSX. Sure. And each developer, I'm trying to remember all the different developers. There was Panasonic, I think, and I don't remember. There are 3 or 4 different developers of the MSX series, but they all had their own little different slant. And the one we wanted was it from Panasonic or Sony? I don't remember. But it had a built-in what was called Genlock capability, so it could overlay text and graphics over live video. Kind of like what a titler does now. When you see, you're watching the news and you see something come up on the bottom and it says their name and maybe some graphics, or how they, when they put the score for the hockey game or baseball game or whatever, it's superimposed graphics over the top of live video. Well, this computer from Japan, back in the late 80s, had that built into it, and so we thought this would be a fantastic product, but we never got anywhere because, can you imagine trying to get support, 12-hour difference, language difference. It was a nightmare. And we got something running, close to running, but we never did get a final product. So we had to trash it, and we went on to the Commodore Amiga, which, was a another great video type of computer platform. So
nice. If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Oh, man. Oh, I don't know. I mean, my 35 years in business started out based on Atari, and it's been a great ride. It was a great computer. It's too bad that they're, not in existence today. I thoroughly enjoyed it and still enjoying it. If Atari still were making computers, I'd probably be using them as well. But yeah, it was a different, through the years, it's been many different lives and times of things that happened, with Computerland and all the experiences we had, and then my business yeah, I mean, long live Atari and their all their games. Donkey Kong, what was the one? Star Cruiser was an amazing game. I don't know if you ever remember that one.
Star Raiders?
I'm getting off on a little side. Star Raiders, that's what it was. Yeah. And then there was, did you ever see Ball Blaster?
Oh, yeah, that was a great one.
Oh, fantastic game. I just loved Ball Blaster. That was great, too. Of course, we had to play a few games every now and then while we were developing on the Atari. So,
nice.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Do you have any of that gear, any of that source code, or any of those cartridges anymore?
I have, I still have an old 800 XL. I've got some of our old cartridges yet. I've got all our old games. Every now and then I drag it out and I play a little bit of Star Raiders or Ball Blaster, and it's a lot of fun, a lot of memories. But
yes.
You pretty soon drift away and get back to the new stuff because of the how so much more advanced it is. So
sure.
One other thing I'm gonna I got two other things I want to mention to you if we've got time yet here.
All the time
one
you need.
is we sold so many Ataris and computers, and we were actually a dealer directly from Atari, and we'd order 50 or 100 computers sometimes at a time from them. At one point, Atari, I think it was near the end, they were trying to figure out how to hang on, but they gave stock in the Atari Computer Corporation to all their dealers. So, and it just so happens I ended up getting one share because we were obviously a very small dealer. Uh-huh. We were only doing 3,000 or 4,000, but I did get a one share stock certificate. And about a few years ago, I was digging through some old stuff, in the corner of the house, and here, and lo and behold, I found my one share of stock certificate, and it's nice colored. I had to frame and put it up. It's kind of cool, I think. So I've got an old stock certificate that's one share of old Atari stock.
Cool. Nice.
And then the other thing that I had to do, of course, when I saw your email, is I got some old magazines that I've got. And I've got some old Byte magazines and some old, actually Computerland made their own magazine. I've got some old Computerland magazines. But digging through my magazines, and I thought, I didn't dig as deep as I could have. I'm pretty sure I've got some antique magazines in there too. Mm-hmm. But I did find a creative computing, analog computing, and the very first #1 ROM magazine. So I don't know if you're familiar with those or not, but I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, that ROM magazine was only published in Canada, and there were only 10 issues.
Oh, is that right? Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah, and I have the #1 issue.
Nice. Cool.
And it's in pretty good shape, but it's probably not worth that much. So.
No, not really, but it's cool to have. Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to have, so that's right.
Nice. Well, great. This is awesome. If you have any of your source code on disks and you're willing to share it, or any of the cartridges, I have the ability to get the data off that stuff, and we can kind of get it off there before the media rots away or whatever, and move it to modern machines.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll have to dig around. I know I've got some EEPROMs laying around somewhere, and but I just don't remember if I've got anything on floppy disk anymore or not. I might. So I'll have to do some digging and some checking. So
cool. Well, let me know what you find.
The other thing I should mention too maybe is to burn EEPROMs was a challenge too, because how do you burn these things? Where do you get the product? Where do you get? So we ended up getting some type of a burner that's you stuck into the old. What was it again? The old was it the 400s or 800s or both of them had a left slot and a right slot. Mm-hmm. And
it was the 800 that had the right slot.
Which one?
The 800 had two slots, and the right one was the weird one that was hardly ever used.
Right, and I think this burner had to go in the right one for some reason anyway, and it was a long one, and it was just a board, and it stuck out of the top about 6 inches, and it was very fragile. I had to be very careful with it. But you'd stick an EEPROM to the top of it, and then, of course, it'd take about 5 or 10 minutes, and it would burn the EEPROM with all your data in there. And then, and I don't know if anyone, your audience is very familiar with EEPROMs or not, but EEPROMs has a little window on the top of it, and if you want to erase an EEPROM, you put it underneath ultraviolet light for about 5 or 10 minutes, and erases the EEPROM, turns it all to zeros again, and then you can reuse it. So that was the great thing about EEPROMs is they're erasable electronic program memory, right? So and if you took I don't know if anybody really knows this or not, but if you had a really strong magnifying glass, you could look through the top of the little window, and you could see in there, and you could see the little prongs that would touch to do I guess that'd be a zero. I guess I don't know. Either they were touching or not touching, and if they were touching or not touching, you got your zeros and your ones, and that's how they created the. And I guess the ultraviolet light made these things bend up straighter or something like that, and that made them, erase essentially. And then when the electronic pulse went through them, it would either leave them open or bend them closed again. So it was a really interesting thing to work with as well. So
nice. No, yeah, I've played with EEPROMs, but I guess I haven't looked that closely with a magnifying glass at them.
Yeah, and of course, I mean these EEPROMs, what were they? They would have been 4K, right? So they're not much memory on them, but
right.
It was enough, so it worked.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I have what I need. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, great. Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it. And, if you or any of your listeners, ever have any questions or want more information, I'm always available. One thing I do try and help out here and I don't know if anybody really knows Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada or not, but I like to help people try and start their business and run business, and so I do a lot of mentoring and advising, and certainly would be open to helping people, start their own business and try and run their own business, because it's been a fantastic ride for me. So
very cool. Nice. Well, thank you so much, Dale.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and have a great day. I appreciate it, and take care.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.